Good morning, and welcome to another Choices History Moment. Today I'd like to talk about jesters and fools and foolish jesters. During the Middle Ages, there was a job you could have called a jester. A jester worked for a king or a queen or another nobleman, and they had many different jobs. We've come to believe they were clowns who just danced around and acted stupid and said silly things. But in fact, they were an important member of the household. They were richly rewarded for their jobs. They were often very educated and wise. They had to be, because part of their job was to be the only truthful person in the king's life. Noblemen weren't going to argue with the king or give them bad news. That was Jester's job. He made fun of the king, kept him humble. He made fun of the court and kept them humble as well. He usually dressed in normal clothes, not the silly costumes that you see. And he had other jobs. Sometimes he was in charge of procuring food for the household or caring for the household kennels. He had traveled with the king or queen into battle. He was with them all the time. And he was as much of an advisor as he was an entertainer. And when it came to entertaining, he had to provide a variety of entertainments. They could sing, they could dance, they could tell jokes, but particularly juggling was very, very popular. But not juggling with balls or sticks or fruit. They juggled weapons, axes, swords, knives. The more dangerous, the more exciting. I once stood on a pier in San Francisco and watched someone juggle chainsaws. So that tradition hasn't disappeared completely. Who then was the fool that we always think of with the funny hat with the big corner sticking out of it and the bells on their tolls? The fool was not a court jester, but rather was a traveling entertainer, more of a clown. They would go to fairs and markets and special events, and they would sing and dance and do acrobatic tricks for the coins that the public tossed to them in these public squares. Today we call it busking when a musician does that, but basically that's what they did. Compared to, say, a jester who might spend many years in the employment of a nobleman. At least one jester was given a beautiful mansion and 30 acres of land for his retirement. So being a fool was different than being a jester. Few jesters were fools and few fools were jesters. But over time, we began to separate them in our imagination. But don't get me wrong. Jesters were silly, and compared especially to modern wit and our more sophisticated ideas of what's funny or not, they were quite different. It was the Middle Ages. People were cruder. They lived closer to the earth. One of the great accomplishments of jesters was if a jester had the ability to fart music, to literally pass gas in tune. There was one famous jester whose last name he was called the Farter, and especially on Christmas, it was a tradition that he would produce Christmas carols the hard way. So it wasn't always seriousness, and it wasn't always foolishness. The life of a jester was quite complicated. Today, we don't really have jesters anymore. We have comedians and we have clowns, but they don't work for rich people. They work for us. So the tradition of entertainment hasn't disappeared. It's just changed forms.